Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Oedipus by Walid Ikhlasi, who is a Syrian playwright. And this play comes out in 1978. So that's actually really interesting because, I would almost characterize this as a mecha Oedipus, because unlike in, say, the Sophocles version, the prophecy in this case does not come from an oracle, from a religious source. It actually comes from a computer. Dr. al-Bahasi's computer, and this is a 1978 computer, so this is really sort of a fantastic conception of what a computer could possibly do in 1978. But al-Bahasi has this idea that the computer can take information about a person, process it, and then extrapolate additional information about them. And so he runs this experiment with his friend Dr. Sufyan, who's a geography professor and skeptical of computers. So basically, they talk through a bunch of information about Sufyan's early childhood, about his various life experiences, his emotions, his inner thoughts and feelings and things like this. And then the computer kicks out a tape. One of the things, or the main thing that the tape says, according to Sufyan, is, "You will get your daughter pregnant. You will kill the one you love most. You will wish death, but in vain." So, not real clear how the computer came up with that prediction, because very little in what Sufyan told the computer would suggest any of that being true. But one of the other things that we know about Sufyan is that he is having an illicit affair with Sulaf, who is al-Bahasi's assistant secretary. She's a sort of, she works for him and seems to do a sort of wide range of tasks, including helping with his scientific experiments with the computer. But she and Sufyan are in love. They're having an illicit affair. Sufyan is cheating on his wife with her, his wife Asma, who is not actually Sufyan's biggest fan. Their relationship starts out in a pretty bad place, and it deteriorates over the course of the play. But Sufyan is incredibly devoted to his son Yazin, who he thinks is going to be this sort of genius scientist / artist / whatever it is. He continually talks about how Yazin will fulfill all of his ambitions. Yazin will excel at everything and all this stuff. But what we start to get over the course of the play, and I'll come back to the Oedipus thing. There's something else I want to say about the Oedipus thing that we get when Sufyan first sort of reads the computer's prediction. But over the course of the play, we start to get these subtle hints that Sulaf might actually be Sufyan's daughter through some mechanism we don't yet know. But there's also a weird sort of reversal of this, because at one point, Sufyan is upset, as he is pretty much throughout the whole play. He's in Sulaf's apartment and says, rocking him like a child. And she says, are you crying, my love? Cry, my little child. Wet my breast with your tears. Cry, cry, and don't fear that others will hear you. Cry, my little one, and sleep. Don't fear. Don't be afraid. I will be near you until death. So here we've got this weird scene where Sulaf, who's in her 20s, is addressing Sufyan, who's in his 40s, as though she's his mother, as though she's trying to comfort a small child. So there's an Oedipal hint there. Because, I mean, this is in fact a reversal in a way of what the Oedipus story is. It's in some sense closer to the Electra myth, because one of the readings of the Electra myth is that she is excessively devoted, almost erotically devoted to her father. And so that father-daughter relationship is central there in the way it is here, rather than the Oedipal relationship, which is the mother-son relationship. But we get, again, this weird hint of Sulaf as a kind of mother figure / lover / as we'll find out, daughter. And the way that we find out is actually really interesting, because we have almost an Aeschylean type recognition. Because in Aeschylus's The Libation Bearers, which is the middle play of the Oresteia trilogy, Orestes and Electra recognize each other through these sort of physical similarities. They have the same type of hair. She puts her foot in his footprint, and it's the same foot, and all this stuff. So Sulaf at one point says, she looks at herself in the mirror. She says, how strange. Isn't that strange? I look like you. Look at this strange likeness. Are we twins? Look at me, love. Am I not like you? And Sufyan identifies some components of her physical features that are like his eyes, his nose. He says their hands are different. But I mean, it's a 40-year-old man and a 40-something-year-old man and a 20-something-year-old woman. So you would expect them to have physical differences. But that bit is followed up. It says, she gives up and sits on his lap. And he says, my little one, my little one. She says, like a little girl, she says, spoil me, spoil me. So we're getting much closer to an overt recognition that she is in fact his daughter. The recognition is finally completed when her father arrives, after Sufyan and Sulaf have been looking at pictures in her family album. And Sufyan and her father recognize each other. Sufyan, knowing that this is the guy whose wife he had an affair with 20-some years earlier, and he sees in the family photo album the picture of her mother, the woman that he had had an affair with. And so he recognizes that in fact she is his daughter from that affair. And she's pregnant with his kid. So this is the first phase of the computer's predictions come true. He has impregnated his daughter, not knowing that she was his daughter. The second and third phase come true shortly after this. Sufyan decides that he's going to kill himself, and so he puts poison in a glass of water, but then he decides that he's going to go write a suicide note explaining to his son that he still has these great ambitions for him. But Yazin wakes up from his nap. He comes downstairs. He calls for his parents. And then it says, he does not hear any answer, so he goes toward the water bottle and finds a glass full of water. He picks it up and calls, "Dad?" Then he drinks the water at one gulp. He has a little bit of dialogue, and then it says he feels pain in his stomach. He grabs his stomach in pain, then falls to the floor. After a moment, Sufian comes in as if he had backed down from the decision to go back to Sulav. So Yazin drinks the poison, unknowingly drinks the poison that Sufian had prepared for himself. This fulfills the second and third parts of the prophecy, because the second part is you will kill the one dearest to you with your own hands. Sufian, in this case, has done that by poisoning Yazin. And the third part of the prophecy is that Sufian will look for death and not be able to find it. And so, because Yazin has consumed the poison that Sufian intended for himself, Yazin dies, whereas Sufian, who sought death, remains alive. Ah ha ha, you say. So, this raises the really interesting philosophical question that, in fact, Sophocles' Oedipus raises as well, which is this fate? Is fate a compelling external force, or is fate somehow internalized? Is it something that the tragic hero ends up doing because the prophecy exists, as opposed to the prophecy driving them to that fate? And so this is the question that we really get in the last scene of the play. Sufian comes back to the lab of Dr. Al-Bahai, and he says, So he is not thrilled with Al-Bahai and the computer, to say the least, but Sufian's attitude has changed. Before, he hated the computer because he didn't understand it, he didn't trust it. Now, he says, "It was your machine that tied my life to a slender thread. As I fell, all my hope and love collapsed." So, Sufian is now taking the position that because the computer made this prediction, that locked him into this fate. That fate itself is the product of the computer's prediction. And this is, and because he now takes that attitude, he actually asks Al-Bahai repeatedly to get the computer to make a new prediction that will allow him to die, which Al-Bahai does not do. Al-Bahai initially is quite adamant that this is not how it works. The computer does not create external events. What it does is it takes the information that it has available to it, and it extrapolates from that. And the more information it has available, the better the predictions it can make, but it doesn't control things. It makes an educated guess. But Al-Bahai, who gets the last piece of dialogue of the play, there's a bit of a choral part here, and the chorus is interesting because it's a kind of collective, or it's a kind of vocalization of characters' unconscious thoughts or impulses. But I'm not going to talk too much about the chorus, even though there's a lot that could be said about it. But Al-Bahai gets the last piece of actual dialogue here. He says, "Poor Sufian, has he turned himself into Oedipus, or was Oedipus latent in him without his knowledge?" So again, we end on this philosophical question that's always inherent in Sophocles' Oedipus, which is whether Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother because he was always fated to and it was inevitable, or whether Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother because he was told that that's what he was going to do. So does Oedipus himself engage in these actions because he believes he's fated to and he's attempting to avoid them? Or is it objective external fate that compels him? And of course, Sophocles does not answer this. And this version, Walid Ikhlasi's version, does not answer it either. So it's an ongoing philosophical problem. But the other thing I want to talk about with this version, with Ikhlasi's version, is the meta-theatrical component. Because pretty much as soon as Zapkin has read out what the prophecy is, almost his next statement is, "Your creative machine has made me an Oedipus and turned itself into a playwright, inventing all kinds of misery for men." So we have these very overt references to Oedipus. We get a couple of them here. And the idea of the computer turned into a playwright. A little bit later he says, "With regret, I must say that your experiment will not become popular except perhaps among writers of cheap and provocative stories." So we've got this awareness of the Oedipus myth, obviously, but then we've also got these sort of references to playwrights, to writers, to provocative literature. So again, there's this self-awareness that the tale that's being told here is in some way fantastical, is in some way challenging belief, challenging our idea of reality. And then a little bit later, we actually find out that Zapkin is doing a school play. And there's no gold stars for guessing what character he's playing. He is playing Oedipus. Zapkin is not super comfortable with that idea, largely because he's just found out that there is a prophecy that from this computer that he is going to marry his daughter, kill the one he loves the most, and be unable to find death. A prophecy mirroring the prophecy in Oedipus the King by Sophocles. But one of the things that's significant about Zapkin being cast in this role is that it gives Ikhlasi a useful and sort of natural way of giving us a plot summary of Oedipus the King. Because one of the things, and we actually see this with both Al-Hakim's version and Bakhatir's version, is that these Arab playwrights feel the need to give a summary or gloss of the Oedipus story because, according to Marvin Carlson in his critical introduction to the Arab Oedipus collection, Greek drama, Greek tragedy did not really make its way into Arabic culture, Middle Eastern culture, until the mid-19th century. Whereas Arab scholars from the 5th century up through really up through like the Renaissance era, up through even the Ottoman period, they were fascinated by Greek philosophy, Greek history, and things like this. And actually, we only have a lot of those texts because they were translated into Arabic and preserved. But they didn't have much of an interest in tragedy. So when Zapkin is talking about playing Oedipus at school, this gives Ikhlasi a useful pretext for saying, hey, audience members who might not know the story of Oedipus, here it is.